Welcome to the world of science function. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the listening. A jagged scar of light tore through the vast darkness of space as the stellar dawn emerged from hyperspace, its hull gleaming faintly against the starfield. Inside, the bridge hummed with activity, though not the sort one might expect from a starship on a mission of interstellar diplomacy. Captain Cale Arden lounged in his chair, one boot propped up against the edge of the console, his fingers idly flipping through a manual labeled Protocols for Crisis Resolution. The edges of the pages were pristine, untouched by use, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around him. "Captain, the system scans are picking up some, anomalies," said Anya Kerr, the ship's science officer, her sharp features lit by the glow of her terminal. "I don't know how else to describe it." "Anomalies?" Cale echoed, still engrossed in the manual. Anomalies could mean anything. Space-time rifts? Rogue asteroids? Or maybe another one of those space krakens? Remember the last one? It just wanted to mate with our ship. "It's not a kraken," Anya replied, her tone clipped. "At least, I don't think it is. But the readings don't match any known celestial phenomenon." Before she could elaborate, a burst of static blared through the comms, causing the entire bridge crew to wince. The crackling sound gave way to a deep, guttural voice that resonated with an unnatural vibration. "Humans. You trespass in sovereign territory. Prepare to face judgment." Cale frowned and finally closed the manual. "Judgment? That's a bit dramatic. Who even talks like that?" "It's not a joke, Captain," said Lieutenant Drax, the security officer, his towering frame leaning over the tactical console. "Unknown vessels have decloaked and are surrounding us." Cale swiveled in his chair to face the main viewport, where three sleek, black ships shimmered into view, their angular designs bristling with weaponry. A faint, eerie glow pulsed along their edges, as though the ships themselves were alive. "Well," Cale said, clapping his hands together. "Looks like we've got ourselves a first contact situation. Anya, start recording. This'll make for a great story back at the Academy." "This isn't first contact," Anya snapped. "They're preparing to fire." Cale's carefree demeanor evaporated as he straightened in his chair. "Right. Drax, shields up. Let's not get blasted into cosmic dust just yet." The ship lurched as a barrage of energy beams slammed into the shields, sending ripples of blue light across the viewport. Alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to their stations. Cale gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles whitening. "Return fire," he barked. "Anya, find out who these clowns are and why they're so trigger-happy." "On it," Anya replied, her fingers flying across the console. As Drax unleashed a volley of plasma rounds, Cale's mind raced. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The mission brief had been simple: deliver supplies to the Thalian outpost, collect some goodwill points, and avoid stirring up interstellar drama. Instead, they were now being attacked by an unknown enemy in a system that didn't even show up on their star charts. "Captain," Anya said, her voice tinged with urgency, "I've identified the ships. They're from the Drazari Collective." Cale groaned. "The Drazari? The ones who consider sneezing in their direction an act of war?" "Pretty much," Anya said. "And according to their cultural database, entering this sector without permission is punishable by immediate execution." "Great. So we're trespassers." "Wonderful." The ship shuddered again as another blast rocked the shields. Cale gritted his teeth. "All right, let's try diplomacy. Open a channel." The bridge fell silent as the comms connected. The image of a Drazari commander filled the screen, a tall, reptilian figure with shimmering scales that shifted between shades of green and gold. His piercing yellow eyes glared at Cale with disdain. "Humans," the commander hissed. "You violate our sacred boundaries. Explain yourselves, or perish." Cale forced a smile. "Commander, I assure you this is all a big misunderstanding. We were just passing through, completely unaware of your, sacred boundaries." The Drazari's eyes narrowed. "Ignorance is no excuse. Prepare to be boarded. The screen went dark, and Kale slammed his fist against the console. Boarded? Not on my watch. Drax, prep the security teams. Anya, find us an escape route. Escape route? Anya shot him a glare. They've got us surrounded. Then be creative, Kale shot back. You're good at that. Anya muttered something under her breath but got to work, her brow furrowed in concentration. Meanwhile, Drax rallied the security teams, his booming voice cutting through the chaos. Moments later, the ship jolted as the Drazari's boarding pods latched onto the hull. The sound of metal groaning and screeching echoed through the corridors, sending a chill down Kale's spine. Here we go, he muttered, gripping his blaster. Let's show them what humans are made of. The first wave of Drazari soldiers breached the ship, their lithe forms moving with unnerving precision. Drax and his team met them head-on, the corridor erupting into a cacophony of plasma fire and battle cries. Kale joined the fray, his blaster humming with each shot as he weaved through the chaos. For all their fearsome appearance, the Drazari weren't invincible. Drax's team managed to hold their ground, forcing the invaders into a temporary retreat. But Kale knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped. We can't keep this up, Anya said, her voice crackling through Kale's earpiece. I've got a plan, but you're not going to like it. Let's hear it, Kale replied, ducking behind a crate as a plasma bolt whizzed past his head. There's a gravitational anomaly nearby, Anya said. If we can lure the Drazari ships into its pull, we might be able to escape while they're caught in it. A gravitational anomaly? You mean a black hole? Kale said incredulously. Technically, it's not a black hole, Anya said. But it's close enough. Look, it's our best shot. Kale sighed. Fine. Do it. But if we die, I'm holding you personally responsible. He relayed the plan to the crew, and the Stellar Dawn began its desperate maneuver. The ship's engines roared as it veered toward the anomaly, the Drazari ships in hot pursuit. Kale gripped the console as the gravitational forces tugged at the ship, the hull groaning in protest. Almost there, Anya said, her voice tense. Just a little closer. The anomaly came into view, a swirling vortex of light and shadow that seemed to devour everything in its path. Kale's stomach churned at the sight, but he forced himself to focus. Now! Anya shouted. The Stellar Dawn fired its rear thrusters, propelling it away from the anomaly just as the Drazari ships were caught in its gravitational pull. The enemy vessels spiraled toward the vortex, their desperate attempts to escape proving futile. As the ship stabilized, the crew erupted into cheers. Kale slumped back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. Well, he said, that was one hell of a first impression. Anya shot him a tired smile. Let's hope we never have to make another one. Kale laughed, but the sound was hollow. He knew this was just the beginning. The Drazari weren't the type to forgive and forget, and their actions had likely just awakened a far greater threat. The faint cheer of survival echoed through the corridors of the Stellar Dawn, but Captain Kale Arden couldn't shake the gnawing weight in his chest. The Drazari had been outmaneuvered, but not defeated. Their escape into the gravitational anomaly might buy them time, but it wouldn't erase the rage of a species known for exacting vengeance with surgical precision. Anya, Kale said, running a hand through his hair as he leaned over the command console, tell me you've got something. I don't care if it's half a plan. Hell, I'll take an eighth. Anya shot him a look that mixed exhaustion with exasperation. We've got bigger problems than just the Drazari. That anomaly we used for our getaway? It destabilized the ship's hyperdrive. If we try to jump again, we'll be scattered across 12 dimensions, none of them pleasant. Kale groaned. Of course it did. Because why wouldn't it? We're looking at a repair job that requires parts we don't have, she added, her voice sharp. Without a functioning hyperdrive, we're stuck. Kale glanced at Drax, who had just entered the bridge, his armor still scorched from the earlier skirmish. The towering security officer folded his arms, his face a mask of grim determination. Stuck where? Uncharted space, Anya replied. The nearest system is a few light years away, and we're running on sub-light engines. We're talking weeks of travel, assuming nothing else breaks. Kale stared out the viewport at the void of stars. Weeks in deep space with a crew already stretched thin. It wasn't just the Drazari they had to worry about. Supplies, morale, even oxygen reserves, everything would be a problem. We'll figure it out, Kale said, forcing confidence into his voice. We always do. Before anyone could respond, the comms system crackled to life, interrupting the tense quiet. A voice, calm yet unsettlingly alien, filtered through the static. Humans. You tread where you do not belong. Kale's stomach dropped. Is that? It's not the Drazari, Anya said, her eyes widening as she pulled up the transmission source. It's coming from the anomaly. Kale's heart raced. The anomaly? As in the giant, swirling death vortex? Yes, Anya replied, her voice tight. But that shouldn't be possible. Nothing can survive in there. It defies the laws of physics. Apparently, the laws of physics didn't get the memo, Kale muttered. He activated the ship-wide comms. All hands, prepare for potential contact. We've got something talking to us. The voice returned, clearer this time, and far more chilling. You have unleashed what was meant to remain dormant. For this, you will answer. Kale's hands tightened into fists. Dormant? What are they talking about, Anya? She shook her head. I don't know, but I'm pulling all the anomaly data now. There's something off about its structure. It's not just gravitational. There's an energy signature embedded in it, something I've never seen before. Great, Kale said. Haunted black holes. That's a new one. Before anyone could respond, the ship shuddered violently, the lights flickering as a low, ominous hum reverberated through the hull. Kale grabbed the console for support. Report. What the hell was that? The anomaly, Anya said, her voice rising with alarm. It's reacting to us. Some kind of energy wave is emanating from it, targeting our ship. Shields up. Kale barked, but Drax shook his head grimly. Shields are already at maximum. This isn't an external attack, it's inside the ship. As if on cue, the hum intensified, and the bridge was plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the room. The crew exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale. Captain, Anya whispered, her voice trembling. We're not alone. Kale followed her gaze to the viewport, where faint, translucent figures began to materialize, their forms shimmering like vapor against the starry backdrop. They were humanoid in shape but lacked any discernible features, no eyes, no mouths, just an unsettling blankness that seemed to stare back regardless. What are they? Kale breathed. They're projections, Anya said, her voice barely audible. Energy-based life forms, tethered to the anomaly. The figures floated closer, their forms becoming more defined. One stepped through the hole as though it were mist, its translucent body flickering like static. The bridge crew recoiled, but Kale held his ground, his pulse pounding in his ears. You have disturbed the silence, the figure said, its voice echoing in a dozen tones at once. The burden is yours to bear. Kale squared his shoulders. Look, I don't know who, or what, you are, but this wasn't intentional. We were just trying to survive. Survival comes at a cost, the figure replied. The Drazari sought to contain us. You have unleashed us. Anya's hands flew across her console, pulling up data streams and schematics. Captain, I think I understand. The anomaly isn't natural, it's a containment field. The Drazari didn't build it. These entities did. To keep themselves locked away. Kale's stomach twisted. Locked away from what? The figure's blank face tilted, as though considering. From war. From the monster that awakens within. Before Kale could process the implications, the ship shuddered again, harder this time. A wave of energy rippled through the bridge, sending consoles sparking and crew members tumbling. The figure's voice grew louder, resonating with an almost unbearable intensity. We are what remains of the reckoning. The choice is yours: become like us, or flee before it consumes you. The figure dissolved into a mist, leaving Kale staring at empty space. He turned to Anya, his voice strained. Tell me you have a way out of this. I don't know, she stammered. If we leave, the Drazari will find us. If we stay, these entities might absorb us. Absorb us? Drax growled. Not on my watch. Kale clenched his jaw. We need answers. Anya, can you establish a link with their energy network? Figure out what they're really after. It's risky, she said. But it's our only option. Then do it, Kale said. We've come this far. No point in backing down now. Anya worked feverishly, her fingers a blur over the console. The ship trembled as the energy field from the anomaly intensified, the translucent figures multiplying and drawing closer. Kale watched them with a mix of fear and fascination, their movements almost hypnotic. I've got it, Anya said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. They're broadcasting a signal, a message. But it's not meant for us. Then who's it for? Kale demanded. The Drazari, she replied. They're calling them back. Kale's blood ran cold. The Drazari weren't just trying to contain these entities, they were keeping them hidden, buried in the depths of space. And now, thanks to the Stellar Dawn, the secret was out. We've just started a war, he muttered. The bridge fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. But there was no time for regret. The anomaly pulsed with a final surge of energy, and the translucent figures vanished, leaving only the cold, oppressive void. Captain, Anya said, her voice trembling. The Drazari ships are back on the scanners. And they're not alone. Kale gripped the console, his mind racing. They had escaped one threat only to awaken another. The stakes were higher now, the danger far greater. But if there was one thing Kale knew, it was this: no matter the odds, the Stellar Dawn wouldn't go down without a fight. The ship's alarms wailed like a desperate animal, the pulsating red lights casting frantic shadows on the bridge. Kale gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white as the Stellar Dawn shuddered under the strain of incoming fire. The Drazari fleet had returned with reinforcements, their sleek black vessels blotting out the stars as they closed in. Plasma beams streaked across the void, slamming into the ship's already battered shields. We're not going to last much longer. Drax bellowed over the cacophony, his massive hands flying across the tactical controls to direct counterfire. Shields are down to 20%. Kale's mind raced. The bridge was a storm of chaos, the crew scrambling to maintain control against impossible odds. Every scenario he ran in his head ended the same way: total annihilation. The Drazari weren't here to negotiate, they were here to wipe them out and bury the truth of the anomaly forever. Anya, he shouted, turning to the science officer. Do we have anything we can use to level the playing field? I'm working on it. Anya snapped, her eyes glued to her console. The anomaly's energy field is still interacting with our systems. I think I can tap into it, but I don't know what will happen if I do. Kale clenched his jaw. We don't have a choice. Do it. Anya hesitated for only a second before her hands began flying over the controls. The ship groaned, its systems straining as the anomaly's residual energy was siphoned into the main power grid. The lights flickered, and the hum of the engines grew to a deafening roar. Captain! Drax called out, his voice tight. They're charging their main cannons. One direct hit, and we're done. Kale swallowed hard, his heart pounding. Anya, I need that energy boost now. I'm almost there, she shouted. Just hold them off a little longer. Drax grunted in frustration but kept firing, the Stellar Dawn's weapons blazing in a futile effort to repel the Drazari onslaught. The ship shook violently as another barrage struck the hull, sending sparks flying from overloaded consoles. Crew members stumbled, their faces pale with fear, but they held their ground. Then, Just as the Drazari ships began to close in for the kill, the anomaly pulsed. A wave of blinding blue light surged outward, enveloping the stellar dawn and the surrounding fleet. The bridge crew shielded their eyes, the intense light searing through the viewport. When the light faded, Kale opened his eyes to a scene that defied explanation. The Drazari ships were frozen in place, their sleek forms suspended in the void as though time itself had stopped. The stellar dawn, however, remained unaffected. What just happened? Kale murmured, his voice barely audible. Anya stared at her console, her hands trembling. The energy field, it's destabilized their systems. It's like they've been disconnected from reality. Disconnected from reality? Drax repeated, his brow furrowing. What does that even mean? It means we have a window, Anya said, her voice steadying. But it won't last long. The anomaly's energy is unstable. If we don't act now, we'll be caught in the fallout. Kale didn't need to be told twice. All right, here's the plan. Anya, reroute all available power to the engines. Drax, prep the crew for emergency maneuvers. We're getting out of here. As the crew scrambled to carry out his orders, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something. The anomaly's energy had saved them for now, but it had also unleashed something far more dangerous. The translucent figures, the remnants of the reckoning, were still out there, and the Drazari wouldn't stop until they were neutralized. Anya, he said, his voice low. Is there any way to stabilize the anomaly? To contain it again? Anya hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. Maybe. But it would require redirecting all of our remaining power, and someone would need to manually trigger the containment field from within the anomaly. Kale's heart sank. That's a death sentence. It's the only way, Anya said, meeting his gaze. If we don't do this, the anomaly will keep expanding. It'll consume everything in its path, including us. Kale looked around the bridge, his crew's faces a mix of determination and fear. They had fought tooth and nail to survive, but now he was asking them to make an impossible choice. I'll do it, Drax said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. This ship needs its captain, and the crew needs someone to follow. If anyone's going to make that sacrifice, it'll be me. Kale's chest tightened, but he nodded. Drax was right, he had always been the one to shoulder the burden when no one else could. Still, the thought of losing his closest friend weighed heavily on him. Drax, he said, his voice hoarse. You're the best damn security officer I've ever had. Make it count. Drax grinned, his sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. Don't worry, Captain. I've got this. As the stellar dawn approached the anomaly, Drax suited up and made his way to the airlock. The crew watched in silence as the massive man stepped into the void, his figure silhouetted against the swirling vortex of light and shadow. Good luck, Anya whispered, her voice barely audible. The ship shuddered as Drax activated his thrusters, propelling himself toward the heart of the anomaly. Kale watched from the bridge, his fists clenched as the seconds stretched into an eternity. Drax's form grew smaller and smaller until it was swallowed by the swirling energy. Then, with a final, blinding pulse, the anomaly collapsed. The swirling vortex disappeared, leaving only the cold emptiness of space in its wake. The Drazari ships, now freed from the energy's grip, began to power up again, but their movements were sluggish, disoriented. Anya, Kale said, his voice sharp. Are we clear to jump? Yes, she replied, her hands flying across the controls. The hyperdrive is stable. We can leave. Kale didn't hesitate. Punch it. The stellar dawn leapt into hyperspace, leaving the Drazari fleet and the remnants of the anomaly far behind. As the ship settled into the quiet hum of faster-than-light travel, Kale leaned back in his chair, his exhaustion finally catching up to him. We made it, Anya said, her voice soft. Kale nodded, but his heart felt heavy. They had survived, but at what cost? Drax's sacrifice would weigh on him forever, a stark reminder of the monster war awakened within them all. The stellar dawn drifted silently through the velvet expanse of hyperspace, its engines humming with a subdued energy. The bridge was quiet, save for the occasional beeping of consoles and the distant echo of footsteps from the corridors. Cale sat in his chair, staring blankly at the viewport. The swirling lights of hyperspace reflected in his eyes, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The sacrifice of Drax hung over the crew like a shroud. Everyone carried on with their duties, but the weight of what had transpired in the anomaly pressed on them all. They had survived, yes, but survival had come at a cost none of them had fully prepared to pay. "Captain," Anya said softly, breaking the silence. She stood at her console, her face pale but determined. "We're approaching the edge of hyperspace. The nearest system is within range." Cale nodded but said nothing. His hand hovered over the intercom button, hesitating. After a moment, he pressed it. "All crew to the bridge. We're regrouping." The ship's corridors came alive with the shuffle of boots and hushed murmurs as the crew gathered on the bridge. They filed in one by one, their faces drawn and tired. Anya, ever the voice of reason, stood by Cale's side, while the rest of the crew filled the remaining spaces. It was a small group, smaller now without Drax, but they had endured. Cale rose from his chair, his gaze sweeping across them. "I know you're all feeling the same thing I am," he began, his voice heavy. "Drax was one of us, a warrior, a friend, and the heart of this ship. What he did wasn't just brave, it was selfless. He gave us a chance to live, and we owe it to him to make that chance count." The crew murmured their agreement, their expressions hardening with resolve. Cale let the silence linger before continuing. "But this isn't over. The Drazari won't stop hunting us. They saw what happened at the anomaly, and they'll want to erase every trace of it, and us." Anya stepped forward, her fingers gripping a data pad tightly. "There's something else you need to know, Captain," she said. "Before the anomaly collapsed, I managed to extract some of its energy readings. What we experienced out there wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was a relic of an ancient war, a war fought by beings far older and more advanced than any species we know." Cale frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we've stumbled onto something that could change everything," Anya replied, her voice steady. "The Drazari weren't just containing the anomaly, they were hiding it. Whatever those beings were, their technology is unlike anything we've ever seen. If we can understand it, it could tip the balance of power in the galaxy." A ripple of unease passed through the crew. Cale leaned against his console, his mind racing. The thought of harnessing such power was tempting, but it came with risks. The Drazari weren't the only ones who would want it. If word got out, it could spark a war that would make their recent skirmish look like a minor dispute. "And if we don't understand it?" Cale asked. Anya hesitated. "Then it could destroy us." Cale sighed, running a hand through his hair. "So, either we figure this out and hope we're the first to do it, or we bury it and pray no one else digs it up." The crew exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, Cale straightened, his decision made. "We'll rendezvous at the nearest system, resupply, and lay low for now. Anya, you'll lead a team to study the data. But this stays between us. No transmissions, no logs, nothing that can trace back to the anomaly. Understood?" A chorus of nods followed, but the tension in the room was palpable. Cale knew this wasn't the end of their troubles. If anything, it was just the beginning. Hours later, the stellar Dawn exited hyperspace into the orbit of an unremarkable star system. The planet below was a dusty, amber-hued world dotted with scattered settlements. It was the kind of place where ships like theirs could disappear, at least for a while. As the crew set about making repairs and restocking supplies, Cale retreated to his quarters. The room was sparsely decorated, its walls lined with holos of past missions and the occasional personal memento. But tonight, the emptiness felt heavier than usual. He sat at his desk, a glass of amber liquid in hand, and stared at the holo on his desk. It was a picture of the crew taken just a few months ago. Drax was front and center, his broad grin and massive frame dominating the image. Cale couldn't help but smile, even as a pang of guilt twisted in his chest. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he said, his voice hoarse. Anya stepped inside, her expression unreadable. She carried a small data chip in her hand, which she placed on the desk in front of him. "What's this?" Kale asked. "Drax's final transmission," Anya said. "He recorded it just before entering the anomaly." Kale's breath caught. He stared at the chip for a long moment before nodding. "Thank you." Anya lingered for a moment, as if debating whether to say more, but eventually turned and left. Kale waited until the door slid shut before inserting the chip into the console. Drax's face appeared on the screen, his usual stoic expression softened by a rare smile. "Captain," he began, his deep voice steady. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it back. That's okay. I knew the risks, and I'd do it again if it meant keeping this crew safe." Kale swallowed hard, his chest tightening. "You're a damn good captain," Drax continued. "But more than that, you're a good man. Don't let what happened out there change that. The galaxy's a dark place, but you've always been a light in it. Keep shining, Kale. And take care of our crew. They'll need you now more than ever." The recording ended, leaving Kale staring at the screen. For a long time, he sat in silence, the weight of Drax's words settling over him like a blanket. Finally, he stood, his resolve hardening. The galaxy was a dark place, but he wouldn't let it consume him. Drax's sacrifice had given them a chance, and he wouldn't waste it. Whatever lay ahead, be it war, discovery, or something far worse, he would face it head-on. The Stellar Dawn had survived the anomaly, and so had its crew. But survival wasn't enough. They had a mission now, a purpose that went beyond simple survival. And Kale would see it through, no matter the cost. With that thought, he stepped out of his quarters and back onto the bridge, where his crew waited. Together, they would face whatever the galaxy threw at them. Together, they would endure.